Hello, welcome to the AT&T Threat Track Show for January 26, 2017. This program provides network security highlights, discussion, and countermeasures for cyber threats. Today we're joined by Jim Clausing online. Welcome, Jim. It's good to see you.
Good to be here.
Okay. And we have here Matt Kaiser, and boy, you're a familiar face on this program. It's good to have you here as well.
Can't get rid of me, Brad.
And we have John Hogoboom joining us today.
Welcome, and I'm John. Here just for color commentary today.
Color and commentary. Yeah. All right, no heckling, please. And I'm Brian Rexroad, and let's get right into it here. And Jim, there were a couple of stories that had come out associated with the most common passwords. And of course, common passwords should never be used in the same sentence. So help us out with this.
Yeah, I first saw the story in the Register, but they were referring back to a report put out by Keeper Security. Basically, these guys got their hands on 10 million passwords that were made public through data breaches in 2016, and they reported on the most common passwords. And, you know, it's same kind of thing we've been talking about for years. These most common passwords are all really bad. Mm-hmm. Nobody should be using them, but obviously people still do.
Sorry for the interruption, Jim, but these were there any indications of where these passwords had come from? I mean, you sent compromised accounts, but did they say anything about what types of accounts or anything like that?
I did not see anything, and I haven't dug deeply into their report about which breaches these came from. But, you know, over the last few years, we've seen similar reports from a number of the big breaches that hit the news. Mm-hmm. So I'm not sure which ones in 2016 were covered here, but...
Okay. And I think perhaps that's a little bit significant. I guess we could assume the worst in this case. So what I tend to think of as probably a worst case scenario is if somebody's protecting their email account with a really crummy password. That's probably a really bad thing because it probably is what can be used to reset their banking account or reset whatever else account they have. But if it's, you know, if it's sort of a, you know, it's the password to get into a site so I can download the updates for my computer or something like that, perhaps it's not as significant. So I just wanted to sort of put a little color on that point, and forgive the interruption. Continue.
Yeah, no, and that's a good point, and it isn't clear to me which breaches these 10 million came from, but you know they listed the top 25 in a little graphic that Keeper Security put on their blog, and all of those top 25, all but two of those top 25 were obviously simple patterns based on a QWERTY keyboard. All of them can be easily brute forced. 7 of the top 15 were shorter. 6 characters or shorter. You know, the most popular was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. The next one was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. You know, then came QWERTY, which, you know, is right there on the top row of the letters on the keyboard. And, you know, things like 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, and 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All of them except 2 were simple patterns based on the keyboard. You know, as I said, like QWERTY 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, or one of them that was down in the like 24th or something was the bottom row of the keyboard, ZXCVBNM, which isn't one I would have recognized until I actually looked at the keyboard. And then they've got the ones that kind of look a little more complex but really aren't. 1Q, 2W, 3E, 4R. Well, that's, you know, those are the top 2 rows of the keyboard, and you're just going, you know, down 1 key, then back up to the top row and down 1 key and so forth. The 2 that were, well, and then there was password.
Because they're following instructions, Jim. They're doing exactly what they're instructed to do. Put in password.
Yeah. The 2 that weren't one of those patterns were actually kind of interesting. And as a result of this, I was referred back to a blog post that apparently I had missed back in July of last year by Graham Cluley, because I follow his blog. but he had posted something on the Tripwire blog, and these two passwords were 18ATC SKD2W, which is kind of random there, and it doesn't really matter what it was. And the other one was similar to it, 3RS RJS something, blah, blah, blah. Mm-hmm. And what Graham concluded from his research last summer was that these two passwords are probably not being actually done by human beings. These are passwords that appear to be programmed into some bots, and these are programmatically generated accounts.
Mm-hmm. So this may actually answer, go ahead and continue before I interrupt here, but it may actually answer the first question that I had.
Yeah, no. So what they believe, or what he believed in, that these were programmatically generated. So these password databases that got breached apparently have a fair number of accounts that were programmatically generated, potentially by these bots, maybe malicious. Not sure exactly what to make of that, but mm-hmm. but that I thought that was kind of interesting, and that was, as I said, a blog post that apparently I missed when Graham posted it last summer.
Mm-hmm. So it suggested that these accounts were ones that were generated basically as dummy accounts, perhaps to use it for creating spamming messaging or something like that. It looks like the blog refers to emails, so maybe email accounts that were generated programmatically to be able to support a spamming campaign or something along those lines. That's certainly a possibility. I think it's probably worth pointing out that the information that's available may be associated with a limited set of victim organizations that the passwords are stolen from, so to speak. So I don't think it would necessarily be fair to make a general statement that the industry in general isn't doing what needs to be done. But it appears at least one of these organizations that was breached could have known about this a little bit better. Although we don't have the other information to really know. That is, how do you identify that those accounts were spamming accounts? Knowledge of the password presumably isn't something that would be available to be able to find that out. And so we're kind of doing some hindsight type analysis at this point. But there possibly was something that could be done.
Well, and so this is a set of passwords that were published, that were breached and published. So where they got them, the websites where they got them, apparently weren't encrypting them or brute forced them fairly easily. They obviously weren't requiring what I would think is the lowest standard for the kinds of passwords you'll let the user set. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. No website should allow you to set that as the password. Mm-hmm. That's so. Obviously, the ones that were breached here, the websites were not setting what I think should be minimum standards on password complexity.
And I agree with you thoroughly as a security advocate. I think it becomes a balance between, I guess, customer satisfaction in some cases, or their tolerance. And if it's a free email service, for example, how much do you really want to bicker with a customer about what they consider to be right or wrong? It's a very difficult balance, and you're absolutely right from a security standpoint. It is the right thing to do. We don't know what the user interface was to say, to at least encourage them to use good passwords or not.
Yeah, I think that I don't know that this is the case, but I think that does help because a lot of these sites now, as you're typing the password and they tell you, weak, good,
Yeah.
you know, great or whatever. I don't know the descriptions
that
they
interface.
use, but
That's
like
very
they will
good.
tell you, so you get some idea of like, well, this password's not good enough yet.
At
Let
least
me
guilt
add
you in
more-
to do something a little
some
bit
special
better.
characters in or something.
But let's be fair, those aren't all using the same algorithm.
No,
either.
they aren't.
They're really
Right.
not.
No.
So
Mhm.
you could
That's
type
true.
AAAA for like 14 or 20 characters. Some of them will say fantastic. But it's not the same as having a mix of different character sets. So
At least they didn't make the top 10.
yeah, true.
Okay, Jim, anything else?
No. There's, we see these, and now that it's the beginning of the year, we're seeing wrap-ups for 2016. We see these reports periodically, and it's another one that I thought was worth mentioning. I have not looked, and sometime in the next month or two, I probably should look at see what's hitting our honeypots for what passwords people are guessing, but that's a different set. So we'll talk about that some other time.
All right, very good. Well, not to worry, we're not done with the topic of passwords. And Matt, what happens when you learn about passwords that are used?
You use them everywhere else.
Yeah, you
Yeah, you do.
Okay,
This is
go
really
for it.
interesting. This was a new term for me, credential stuffing. This is a blog post on Shape Security, and they also have like a credential spill report that came out this year. But the idea of credential stuffing is taking sets of already exposed credentials, like the ones that we were just talking about in the last story. Take the username and password. And if the username is an email address, which is used, pretty much everywhere, like I may have 7 or 8 accounts or 100 associated with my personal email address, which means that people can go to the other sites and say, well, Matt might have an account here. Maybe he used the same password again, and try it there and see if it works. And then you've got 2 accounts. But you can do this en masse. You can load it into software. The one in particular that they mentioned is called Sentry MBA. And it's basically an interface that people can drop leaked credentials into, point it at a bunch of different websites, and try them all at once.
Yeah, so it's not even just one. It's like,
It's
sprayed around.
hundreds. And they'll, the software will do in such a way that it doesn't trip the alarms for brute forcing that most sites will have set up. But yeah, you could try 1 week credential across a whole bunch of different sites. And I guess it has a user community around it because, it's the same general idea, but the interfaces to every single site have to be individually programmed. Maybe there's an API, or maybe there's a web interface or some other way of getting that credential test done. But the number of sites that support it is actually pretty staggering. So it's really kind of interesting and probably one of the scarier things I've seen in a while. But the point is that, once the credential is out in the open, expect it to be tried on all these different sites. And there's a whole underground market of people selling these creds to each other, and they may have an interest in a particular website that you may be using. The statistics that they mentioned was that of the credential breaches in 2016, anywhere from 0.1% to 2% of those credentials get reused successfully on other sites. That reuse of those credentials opens up a whole other avenue of fraud on whatever those sites are for. Maybe it's a shopping site, maybe it's your credit card or your bank. So it's really important that people don't reuse these credentials. And I think this is one of the strongest arguments for it, is that someone will say, well, maybe who's really going to go and try my password on all these different sites? Well, they're going to try everybody's passwords on all these different sites automatically, with minimal amounts of effort and pretty significant payoff.
Yeah, I think the significance of the payoff is you can, in a sort of a qualitative measure, by looking at the level of sophistication that exists, it's depressingly impressive.
Yeah.
And so I think that's the kind of, the fact that they've gone through all of this work and clearly the folks that are building this tool are monetizing that activity is an indicator that it is being successful for organizations that have an interest in basically gaining unauthorized access to users' accounts. Most likely for fraud type activities where they can monetize their accesses in some way or another. Yeah. Or phishing attacks, spamming activities, those types of things as well. Yeah.
Sure, that's the whole long tail of that economy, that any value of a compromised credential, people will find a way to squeeze that last little drop out. So.
Yeah. And this is where the two-factor authentication really can pay off, even if it's the what I call pseudo two-factor or the two-channel authentication, where you might use a messaging service and an email service and parallel to each other. It provides 2 channels for the authentication. Right? Like pardon me, a password as well as a messaging service or something like that for the login, it would help to thwart this kind of issue. But that doesn't mean those things can't be bypassed. That is, if somebody's really being targeted, that's probably not going to work. All right, very good. Thank you, Matt. And Jim, your story led into this very well. Both very important topics for folks to be paying attention to. And if you're involved in an enterprise, I think making sure that these kinds of messages get out to the folks in your organization is very important too. So on a little bit of a different note here, we've talked a lot about staying on the mainstream app stores. And so this is a story that had come out. It was from Engadget.com. And they were basically pointing out that they're ordering, that is China, the government of China, is ordering app store registration. And so one of the factors that is involved here is, as I understand it, the Google App Store is not available in China. So folks that are on Android devices, and I'm not sure if Apple has a similar situation or not, but they're really basically forced to third-party app stores. And one of the observations is that the quality of the apps is not as closely monitored, not as closely controlled for security. Yeah, even just the quality of the apps, perhaps. That is, if it's getting really bad ratings and people complaining for one reason or another, they might not be motivated to take it off. I think the sort of the market control that exists in the mainstream app stores is, you go to the Apple App Store, and there's some association between that app and the Apple organization. You go to the Google App Store, and there's some association between the app that you get and Google. And if somebody's complaining, this is a piece of garbage, it shouldn't be here, it's insecure, it's causing problems, or it's malware, you would expect them to take it off. I think in the third-party space, there isn't necessarily that close of a binding or not as significant of a motivation. And so that's one of the reasons here that it would make sense. I think it's generally a good thing that they're asking to register the App Store so that the security of that can be monitored better. But there's a downside to this. There's a counterpoint. That is, they could use it for censorship. That is, control which apps are in the app stores and how information flows in those, or perhaps to control access to apps or eliminate apps that don't facilitate monitoring that's desired in certain countries. So that's, I think, one of the trade-offs that fundamentally exists between providing good security and providing perhaps freedom of speech, is that making sure that the controls aren't overreaching. But I wanted, go ahead.
I'm gonna counterpoint this pretty hard. So, Brian Krebs' book, Spam Nation, I think it was.
Yeah.
He talks about underground markets and the fact that they aren't regulated, but the reason that there's a pressure to excel within those markets and kick out bad vendors and the same sorts of things that you would expect a legitimate app market to do, is because the reputation is so high in those underground markets.
Yeah, if you lose your reputation in those markets, definitely, yeah.
So I'm wondering if there isn't that same kind of pressure, even without the idea of being on a government list of legitimate app markets, to clean up a market.
You would hope there is.
Yeah.
The observation is apparently is not, and I can support that with a little bit of data here, and then we can kind of come back to your point.
Yeah.
So, I wanted to at least substantiate this point. And, it's been my perception for some time that the issue of security is more significant in the Asian markets. Now, there are probably a lot of things that influence that. But if you compare, and this is actually a graphic from the second quarter 2016 IT threat evolution report from Kaspersky, and it's basically showing the distribution, and this is attacks, so we need to put that in I don't want to misuse the data here. This is showing attacks against devices, but US significantly better relative to, say, India and China. Now, it's been my impression that part of that is because the prominence of the third-party app markets that allows that type of activity to take place or facilitates it more.
Okay.
I could be completely wrong about that, but that's been my impression. And so that's why at least the notion of being able to register the app stores and at least have a little closer eye on it would be helpful. And perhaps it's not. But
No, that's
to your
a good point. And I'm trying to distinguish the two in my mind is what's different about an illicit market for something like on the dark web as opposed to an app store. And I think part of the app store problem is that it's very easy to add more malware to the app store in an automated fashion and poison it very quickly. And it only takes one person to do that, and it takes an entire team of app store developers and support folks to keep cleaning up that market.
Right.
It's a little bit
that's
harder, I
possibly
think,
true,
in a
yeah.
market where you're dealing with individuals as opposed to maybe it's the same. Maybe I'm overstating it.
You
But
may be right. That's a contributing factor. Again, this is not a scientific study. I try to point out where it's part of my impression here, and your point is absolutely right. My personal impression, there certainly are security analysts associated with looking at the apps and validating them. I think the review space or that having the customer feedback is an important aspect of it as well.
Okay.
And because if the complaints start going up, I think it's a mechanism that can be used. I don't know to what extent it is. So, perfectly valid points. I don't think it's a conclusive point here.
Well, and one of the issues with China in particular, since the Google App Store isn't available there, is, for those of you who've used an Android device, if you don't, if you want to load something from a third-party app store, you have to go click on the allow third-party whatever. But once you do that, then it is much easier for malware to install additional apps on your device in the background. And, so that probably is also contributing to the, China here being in red on that graphic that you've got up.
A very good point. Yes, absolutely. If you go in and turn security off feature off.
it's off. It doesn't prompt you every time, which it probably
Right,
should.
it's off. Yeah, that's a possibility. Yeah. Okay.
Japan's doing really good, though. That's my
Japan's doing
observation.
pretty well. Yeah, they're in the green here, and considering
The
it's
dark
not
green.
exactly a small population per capita, it's very large. One of the other aspects of this, by the way, is I'm not sure that this has been normalized for population, or the population
Right.
of devices. I think they're just counting here and then using that as a reference point. So, that's obviously a factor to be considered. So that's our show for today. We'd like to thank you for joining us. If you'd like to get in touch with us, you can email us at attthreattrack@list.att.com. And you can find AT&T Threat Track on the AT&T Tech channel, on YouTube, as well as on iTunes as a podcast. You can follow us on Twitter. Our handle is @ATT Business. And Jim, I'd like to thank you for joining us today. John, Matt, thank you for joining us today. I'm Brian Rexroad. We'll be back with a new episode next week. And until then, keep your network safe.